I was just going to pick up on this. There's a story, and the government keeps on floating this, and it's this notion of the right to buy, but in relation to housing association properties. The reason I get particularly exercised about this is that, as it happens, I'm chairman of a housing association in South East London called Hexagon, a lovely and wonderful organisation. The way in which housing associations work is terribly simple. We've got a bunch of houses. We borrow money, we get grants, and we build a bunch more houses, and we try and make sure that the houses that people are living in, their homes, are kept and maintained to the best standard possible, and we build really good new carbon-free homes. And the reason we do that in South East London is that, as people will know, getting on the housing ladder in London is incredibly difficult. All over the country, it's incredibly difficult. So the idea that what you do is you sell off the assets merely reduces our ability to build more houses. It's a completely self-defeating idea. And they always say, oh, it's one for one. But actually, by which they mean is that everyone you sell, you get the money to buy and build. No, that just simply doesn't work. If the government really wants to do something useful, instead of sort of forcing ideology right to buy on people, what they should do is massively increase the grants, because the value for money that we can give as housing associations is enormous. Well, I shall now stand down for my rant, but it makes me jolly annoyed.
Of course, the thing is, this was an incredibly popular policy when Mrs Thatcher did it in the 1980s with council housing, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I come from a family in which, most of the people I'm related to are, of course, Conservatives. And almost to a person, they now regret that policy. And the reason they regret it is that you don't sell off your assets unless you rebuild and replace them.
Right,
and that didn't happen.
And that is the bit that is key.
That's the red line.
Replacing and rebuilding. And having been housing minister, I can see what you're saying. And this is the thing. When my, grandparents and various other people bought their houses in the 80s, as it were, they were already assets that had decreased in price because nobody was coming out and repairing them. Those people had lived in those houses for a long time. They had a vested interest in them. So there was a real purpose why they were sold off in the 80s. They weren't being repaired. They were sort of going into a state of rack and ruin. So people bought them at a reduced amount because that was sort of the value. And then they took them on. They looked after them. They were theirs. And then they repaired them and went forward. And you're quite right. You can do that if you are building more. Yeah. So when I was housing minister, I said, look, we've got to build more. There are over 1 million people on housing waiting lists. If you're talking about supply and demand, and that's what we believe in as a Tory party, there is 1 million people. There is a huge demand. Build more. But I didn't agree with this immediately selling them at 70% of the cost, losing 30% straight away, when they are brand new homes and they haven't been in there and been a good tenant. You've got to have good tenants as well.
And if you extrapolate that argument further. If you invest in a good home for people and they can live where they're warm, where they're not damp, where they can do washing, where kids can do their homework, there's a whole bunch of stuff that flows from having a home. But it's not the right to buy, it's the right to have a home.
Isn't this, though, about extending opportunities to people to own their own home who may otherwise not get the opportunity to own their own home? Is that not a good thing?
I'm saying that this in relation to housing associations is foolish, because if you give us money, we can build socially affordable houses for people who will probably not have the ability financially to own their own home, but they can have a guaranteed home where the rent is reasonable and it's well repaired and kept up.